The European football leagues have started their new seasons. Over the summer, a number of European stars signed with the Pro League in Saudi Arabia. So how is all of this competition going to play out? Hello, I'm Arango, and this is The Heat. This Friday, the transfer window closed for most football leagues in Europe, meaning no more players can be signed. But they can still be lured away since the Saudi League window remains open. Clubs could lose some players while they face off at the most prestigious competition, the Champions League. We begin with this report from Browne in Madrid.
Well, last season's treble winners Manchester City and their freshly minted UEFA Player of the Season Erling Haaland will be favourites to win the Champions League again this season, along with some of the usual suspects like Bayern and Real Madrid. The draw has given us some Champions League classics like Manchester United versus Bayern, and while City's draw was relatively kind as they face RB Leipzig, Red Star Belgrade and Swiss side Young Boys, you can't say the same for PSG and Kylian Mbappe. They'll face Dortmund, Milan and Newcastle in this season's group of death. Coaches like Luis Enrique and Liverpool's Jurgen Klopp are facing a new kind of competition this season too. A competition taking their top players to Saudi Arabia. The Saudi Pro League has been offering eye-watering contracts and brought in big stars like Benzema, Neymar and Cristiano Ronaldo. Kylian Mbappe is Europe's highest paid player, earning just over $60 million per year after tax at Paris Saint-Germain. In Saudi Arabia, Ronaldo takes home more than 3 times that, $219 million, tax-free.
Europe has been playing this game with Latin America forever. We've already seen Gabriel Vega, a Spanish player that was on the radar of Barcelona, PSG and Premier League clubs, and he left to play in Saudi Arabia at the age of 20. So for sure, others will follow.
The transfer calendar has the big European teams sweating too. The Saudi League window to buy players stays open 2 weeks after the European one shuts. Imagine Liverpool star player Mo Salah accepting an offer in the Gulf, leaving the English club unable to replace him. Liverpool manager Jurgen Klopp was calling on UEFA or FIFA to do something about the transfer window issue. However you look at it, seismic shifts are happening right now in the world of soccer. The Saudi League is backed by the 2030 Sovereign Wealth Fund, which is trying to diversify the economy away from fossil fuels. The Pro League has money to burn, and European teams are trying not to get caught in the backdraft. Browne, CGTN, Madrid.
There is a lot to discuss. Let's bring in our panel. From Berlin, Merrill is a football journalist. From Stockholm, Nima Tavallaey is host of the Italian Football Podcast. Tim Vickery is a football journalist, joining us from Rio de Janeiro. And from New York, Juan Arango is a commentator for the MLS Season Pass. Welcome to all of you. Nima Tavallaey, let me start with you. As I said, the European leagues are now starting. All eyes again on the usual suspects, Manchester City in England, Real Madrid in Spain. And I know this is a big question to start off with, but what are your expectations for the top leagues this season?
Well, I expect the Serie A to be exactly as unpredictable as it has been for the past few years. Let's remember that the last 4 winners in the Serie A have been 4 different clubs, I should say. I doubt that we will have a 5th one this year, but overall I expect, exactly as you mentioned there, I expect Bayern to dominate in Germany, City to walk it in the Premier League, and Real Madrid and PSG to win in Spain and France respectively.
Max, we've just had the Champions League draw. That's the most important club tournament in the world, and as we heard our reporter point out there, I think he called it the death squad. We have a very tough group with Paris Saint-Germain, Borussia Dortmund, Milan and Newcastle. What do you see ahead?
Yeah, definitely a group of death, and a tricky one to see who will get out of that. I mean, for Newcastle fans who are returning to the Champions League, it's a bit of a tough blow, you've got to say. But overall, I think we've got quite a few groups where you can already expect to see the top 2 forming there. But outside of this group of death, I think there are quite a few where we would be surprised not to see our favourites go through. However, with that group of death, it's going to be a really entertaining one for all the fans. And Dortmund sporting director Sebastian Kehl yesterday said that this is what the Champions League is all about. You want to prove yourself against the very best teams in Europe. RB Leipzig made similar noises after being drawn in a group with Manchester City. It's crucial for them to get through in the Champions League. They have done so in previous seasons. But again, you face the best team in Europe and you relish that opportunity. And I think many of these clubs will relish that opportunity. For Bayern as well, it's going to be a tricky group, but not one that they can't manage. And I expect them to finish top of their group.
Juan, let's talk about football here in the United States. UEFA are considering hosting the Champions League final here in the United States, and that could be as early as 2026, according to UEFA's president. What do you think that could do for the game here?
I mean, it's kind of a tricky question because, I mean, obviously it's been talked about. It hasn't been officialized. But when you talk about what it could do, it could be great for UEFA because, I mean, we've seen how successful the summer tours have been over the past few years. But now you start adding a great deal of incentive in matches that actually count to be able to be played here in the United States. So, yeah, there would be a great deal of added interest to a tournament like the Champions League, and also the fans would be able to come in. I mean, I've seen instances in stadiums here in the United States where Manchester United and Arsenal, for example, had a near full house. Real Madrid was playing the full houses. So, I mean, I don't know if it's going to grow it. It will give an additional interest to it, but then we start talking about other questions such as logistics, such as the fatigue the players in Europe have been suffering over the past couple of years. How will that also come into play?
What about the Messi effect here in the United States? I mean, how much impact is the Argentinian star having on football here?
On football, it's been great. Look, by the way, I'm here. I just flew in today. I'm in New York, and something that I haven't seen. Even look, and I'll even compare it to when LeBron James arrived in South Florida back in 2010. You didn't see the euphoria that there is in every single city that he goes to, in every single stadium that he's been, the anticipation. And as a matter of fact, you come here to New York and you see the Adidas store, which is the official sponsor of MLS, having an actual store where it's all Messi, it's all Inter Miami in New York. So that should give you a taste of how things are. And every time I've been at a stadium doing commentary for MLS Season Pass, you see the home team, maybe a couple of away team fans coming in, and then the third jersey you end up seeing is Leo Messi. So I think that ends up giving you a bit of an idea of how much of an impact it's had within a football community, within the football community here in the United States. Now, outside of sports, there's going to be other competition, but within football, it's been enormous.
Tim, great to see you. Messi, of course, avoided the Saudi overtures, but the Saudis have been spending big to attract some of the biggest names in football. If we look at some of those names, they spent more than 850 million euros, actually, to attract players like Benzema, Neymar, Sadio Mane, Firmino, but not just players, even top coaches like Roberto Mancini. Let's listen to what Mancini had to say.
With all these stars that are here, they can improve the Saudi players. This is what happened in Italy many years ago when a lot of big foreign players came to Italy, and we were improved a lot.
So, Tim, how is all of this shaking up the players' market?
Well, it's very interesting, isn't it? Interesting times, interesting developments. So far, I don't think many of the big European clubs are particularly upset about what's going on. It's the Saudi market is giving them a way to get expensive players off their wage bill and even get big transfer fees for this. I think for the foreseeable future, Europe's Champions League is the big event. It's the big collection of quality of players from the four corners of the world. It's where you chase glory. It's where if you want to be considered a great player, if you want to win the respect of other great players, that's where you have to be. Now, I just wonder if we've got the glimpse of perhaps a rival pole to the dominance of European club football. And no, I'm not talking about Saudi Arabia. I'm talking about the Americas. You've mentioned there with Juan the effect that Lionel Messi is having on football in the United States. in my region, in South America, we have a problem in our Champions League, the Copa Libertadores, which is the total domination now that Brazil is exerting. But how about this? You put the Americas together. You put South America together with North America, with the momentum that Major League Soccer has in the States, with the size of the Mexican clubs, and the history and tradition of the big clubs in Brazil and in Argentina. I know that the logistical problems there are huge because the Americas are vast, but I do think there is the potential there, perhaps more than what's happening in Saudi Arabia. There is the potential in a kind of Pan-American tournament to have a rival pole to the domination of European club football.
Okay, Juan, what do you make of that idea?
It's been talked about. I mean, Tim's right about that. There's been a lot of speculation about it. Fans have said, hey, why not have MLS and Liga MX start playing Copa Libertadores yet again? And it is a great idea. It is, in theory, you start having the best teams in all of America being able to compete against one another. Again, the logistical problem, because theoretically, let's say Seattle Sounders or Vancouver Whitecaps end up going to have to play Boca Juniors at La Bombonera. It's about a 14-hour, 16-hour flight direct. So it's a bit of a complicated situation to end up having logistically a tournament of that ilk. But you see a lot of approaching by one and the other, by CONMEBOL and CONCACAF. The rebirth, if you will, of what was once the Inter-American Cup, which was the winner of CONCACAF and the winner of the Copa Libertadores ending up playing each other, which was something that was played back in the 80s and going into the 90s and early 2000s. Kind of similar what the Intercontinental Cup is and will continue being between UEFA and CONMEBOL. But you start to see those two types of connections that ends up being a very interesting situation that can end up growing the game even more so. Case in point, let's not even talk about the club situation right now. We'll talk about Copa America going into next year. That you have teams from CONCACAF qualifying into the tournament and playing against every single team in CONMEBOL. So there is that approach. There is that look to try and join forces to be able to compete against Europe to a certain extent.
Tim, before we move on, I just want to get your view on something that well, you've been writing about this actually. The Saudis are paying a lot rather for European players or players from European clubs, and these are mainly players that European clubs are no longer interested in. But what happens when very young players see the attraction of the Saudi league?
Well, this is the big question, is it? Will they see the attraction of the Saudi league? What are people motivated by? If you are motivated purely by money, then fair enough. But if you're motivated by glory, and if you are motivated by making your name, if you are motivated by winning the respect of other great players, then I think your first option is still going to be shining in Europe's Champions League. There are, after all, only so many Ferraris that one can drive. So I can't see it yet attracting those who are on the way up. It's not necessarily an elephant's graveyard at all, what's happening in Saudi Arabia, but so far they are attracting players who have made their name. And where have they made their name? In Europe's Champions League. And I can't see that changing.
Nima, let's talk about the flow of money the other way around. The UEFA president has been talking about outside investments by Middle Eastern countries in European clubs. This is what he had to say. Let's listen.
Clubs have been bought up by investment funds, local identities have been lost, and expenditure has gone through the roof. With certain clubs being run in a high-risk, even reckless manner that defies all logic and principles. We are faced with galloping globalization and everything that implies, benefits and risks.
So, Nima, what do you make of that? I mean, what are the benefits and the risks?
Well, it's interesting that he says that, given what happened with Manchester City and also with PSG. It feels that Alexander Ceferin sometimes, it depends on who he's talking to on that day or and what he says. Look, I think football is globalized. I don't think you can get the proverbial poo back into the horse. There are going to be more countries that are going to invest. Saudi Arabia have obviously, we all know that they have a view towards investing and wanting to host the FIFA World Cup, and I think their league is of course a step in that direction. I think football is globalized, and I think it's going to become much bigger. I think European clubs and European football, although the Champions League we're still far away from that, just like Tim said, I do think that we are moving towards a direction where football becomes even more so globalized. I mean, the idea that you were talking with Juan and Tim earlier about, the teams from the MLS and CONMEBOL going also, one Copa America once more, despite logistical issues. I think we're seeing something similar in Asia as well. I think Qatar kind of started that. Saudis put in the overdrive in that. Where it ends, I couldn't tell you. But I do think that we are moving more towards that direction.
Max, one of the complaints that we've been hearing from European clubs is that the transfer window, which is closed in Europe, remains open in Saudi Arabia, as we heard from our reporter as well. That's for another 2 weeks. It leaves open the chance that Saudi teams can buy European players, which they are then not able to replace. I mean, is that fair criticism?
Well, at the end of the day, it's business, and unless FIFA steps in and makes a ruling there, I think you can't really complain. The football in this form does not have a salary cap. We've seen that in American sports. There are certain leagues that have adopted a salary cap. That doesn't work in a globalized sport in which not every country will agree to that. And same way in this kind of globalized markets, a country like Saudi Arabia may well set its transfer deadline day later than the European market. It's a clever move, and at the end of the day, the players will go to the highest bidder. And as we've heard some of the others on this panel mention, so far, a lot of the European clubs, like Chelsea, for instance, have seen this as an opportunity to balance their books. On the other hand, I think UEFA have been somewhat spooked by the Super League in recent years, now seemingly a little bit spooked by Saudi Arabia as well. And this will continue to happen. Saudi Arabia is gathering momentum, the MLS is gathering momentum, and it may well happen that UEFA could find itself on the back foot. They have to find creative solutions to address this. One option is to move the game into the US market a little bit more, but tradition and history, that's still the advantage that European football holds, as well as the fan culture, which is in America budding. You see a club like Seattle Sounders that has really managed to cultivate a very strong fan culture. And as Tim said, obviously in Brazil and Mexico as well, there's a lot of history and fan culture there as well, but there's not necessarily the money that we see in European football. Saudi Arabia has the money, but not the fan culture. So European football still leads the way there, but there's definitely, gathering momentum in different markets.
Juan, speaking of the Saudis spooking the football world, I mean, when we look at the transfer window, when it's open, we see some of the biggest moves within European clubs. But now we're seeing some of the big names going to the Saudi League. I mean, how concerned should the football world be about that?
I mean, it's competition. I mean, everyone else, Max and Nima and Tim have already mentioned how much, it's a globalized market. It's globalized competition. Who offers you the best possibilities to be able to, apply your craft in a certain league? I mean, not everyone has said yes to Saudi. Okay, I mean, I'm pretty much the primary example. Everyone's going to bring out and blurt out first is going to be Leo Messi. The second one, just a couple of days ago, there was speculation that Gustavo Gomez, the central defender for Palmeiras, was heading to Saudi, as they offered a pretty seductive offer to the club, and they said no. It also depends on the league. It also depends on the club. It also depends on the situations, because it's funny that I hear all this, because Europe has been doing it to South America for years. I mean, you looked in the past at the Brasileirão, and many teams in Brazil and many teams in Argentina and throughout South America would stock up for the first half of the tournament, and by the first half of the year. And for the second half of the year, many of those players have already gone to Europe. Many of those squads have been basically pillaged throughout because of transfer markets, and also because of the economic necessities in certain leagues, case in point Argentina and pretty much every other country that is not Brazil right now. So it's been pretty normal from an outside perspective, that's something that Europe's been doing for years on end.
Tim, is that a valid criticism, a valid concern? I mean, people say, look, a lot of the big names are going to Saudi Arabia because of the very big paychecks that are available there, but Europe has been doing that to South America for a long time.
Certainly has, yeah. It's an entirely valid observation. And once the market becomes global, a consequence of this is concentration, because you've got the whole planet there open for business, and there will be a few players who will be able to corner a significant share of that global market to put themselves in a privileged position. And this is a problem for European football as well. And perhaps the biggest challenges that European football faces at this present time are neither Saudi Arabia nor the possibility of a poll in the Americas. They're self-inflicted ones. One mentioned there by Ceferin is clubs with real ties to their community becoming the playthings of billionaires or private equity funds. You worry about the consequences of this. And the other is the need to keep the big clubs on board. There was the aborted Super League project, and what we've seen is that UEFA, Europe's governing authority, has caved into that to a certain extent. This is the last season where the Champions League in Europe will have its current format of 8 groups of 4, the top 2 from each group qualifying for the knockout phase. Now, that is a simple format for the fan to follow. And football is a simple game at its best when it retains its simplicity. What's coming in next year is convoluted, but it's a format designed to give more games, more guaranteed games and guaranteed income to the big clubs. Now, that's something that could alienate some of the supporter base who are almost going to have to do a PhD in league tables in order to follow what's going on.
Nima, let's talk about alienating the supporter base and look at, the international attraction of the game. I mean, there are people who know very little about football, or soccer as it's called here, but they do know the big names. They do know who Lionel Messi is. They do know who Cristiano Ronaldo is, Neymar. They are not playing in the European leagues. What about, Europe right now? I mean, the big name that everybody recognizes there would probably be Kylian Mbappe. Can Europe lose its clout with fans?
Well, long term, there is a risk, of course. I mean, exactly what Juan was saying. I really want to pick up on that point. This is, football culture is something that is built long term. We didn't just end up here magically one day on 2023 and all of a sudden all the football culture and all the football history and fan culture just existed magically in Western Europe or Europe. This is something that is built long time. In Saudi Arabia, I take a little bit issue with what Max said there. Yes, they do have footballing culture. It's 2023 now. This isn't back in, when they started, when they first qualified for the World Cup some 20, 30 years ago. This is a country with a population of 32, 33 million. They have a long-rooted now, today in 2023, football fan culture. And they have grown up watching the Champions League. And now they are cultivating that culture. Qatar is a completely different animal, as there's barely a population that is from Qatar. Mostly are guest workers. If we look at it, just in terms of population and demographics, Saudi is a completely different animal. Also, in comparison to China, when they did the Chinese Super League, I mean, football is not the biggest sport in China. I doubt it will ever will be, but it could be one day. However, in Saudi, football is a huge sport. It's the biggest sport. There is now a long-standing tradition. There's a couple of generations that have grown up watching football, and so I think that yes, European football needs to. They've had almost 60, 70-year head start, and they haven't done the things that, for example, U.S. professional sports have done in order to maintain this kind of interest, so that no league and no franchise in the U.S., to use the U.S. example, can dominate and concentrate all the talent within just one team or something like that. Whilst Europe, with the Galacticos, as Real Madrid in different eras, now with Manchester City, PSG, like this, Europe has had these issues, has had a head start to address and cement its place at the top. But now, well, they might have just passed up on an opportunity which I think Saudi is seizing on.
Max, let's look ahead to some of the upcoming players. There is Jude Bellingham at Real Madrid, Vinny Jr. There as well. Where do you see that going?
Real Madrid, I think, are in a very strong position now. I mean, they were obviously very interested in Kylian Mbappe, and I think that's no secret. That's been long-standing. I think, to address also what Nima was saying, you look at European leagues, and there have been examples of leagues and clubs alienating their fan bases somewhat. Spanish clubs outside of the top three feel neglected by the TV money distribution. Italy, there's been examples of clubs like Juventus changing their badge. That didn't sit well with fans. But and in Germany, we have the 50+1 rule, which has safeguarded a lot of this kind of outside investment that we've seen in the Premier League, in France, also affecting fan bases when it doesn't go right. I think in Spain, Real Madrid still have a lot of money, even though they have struggled in past seasons to compete with the likes of PSG and Manchester City. Now they do have a very strong squad. I think the signing of Jude Bellingham was a real statement signing on their part, but they did miss out on Kylian Mbappe again. And this has been ongoing. Harry Kane, a player who also has attracted interest from top clubs across Europe, didn't go to Spain. So there's a risk for Real Madrid, but at the moment, I think they're in a good shape in terms of their squad. And in the Champions League, they're in a group where they should finish top and again be one of the favourites for the Champions League trophy.
Max, there's a great story from the city where you are, Berlin, with one of that city's teams, Union Berlin. And it's quite a backstory, actually. Fans actually helped rebuild the stadium and even donated blood to raise money for the club. Now it's reached the club competition. What can you tell us about this story?
Yeah, Union Berlin were a club that for long times, when I was growing up in the 90s and early 2000s in Berlin, were not really on people's radar because they were in the third division and then the second division, never a team that threatened to be promoted. They were promoted in 2019, and that came off the back of, as you mentioned, a fantastic story. They were a club in the former east of Germany that were seen very much as a protest club. Then after the wall fell, fans went on a blood drive when the club was close to liquidation, when the club was rebuilding its stadium, which is a fantastic stadium, over 50% standing as well, which has been a bit of a problem in European competitions. Fans came in for a couple of days to help builders finish this stadium. So there's a real tight bond in the community. But since getting promoted in 2019, many people thought they would go straight back down. They've stayed up. Not only that, 3 seasons back-to-back being in Europe and now being in the Champions League in the top European competition.
Tim, we have a little bit of time left. I have to ask you about the Brazilian league. It's past the halfway stage right now. The club in the lead right now is Botafogo. It's had many glories in its very distant past, but also a series of problems until, of course, it was bought by US investors. It's now in the lead by 11 points. It's poised to win its first title in 28 years. What can you tell us about this rise from the ashes?
This is as extraordinary as Max's tale of Union Berlin. Botafogo, they've fallen on hard times. The investment came in from John Textor, who also owns clubs in England, in France and in Belgium. That could be a problem later down the line because it looks like he's going to take the best players from Botafogo over to Lyon in France. But at the start of the season, late April, no one expected Botafogo to be anything other than mid-table plodders. First, we have the regional championships. Botafogo in the state of Rio, they couldn't even come in the top 4 in their own state. So they can't possibly be contenders to win the Brazilian title. And here they are. I was in the stadium for their first game. They managed to win somewhat streakily with a late goal. On the train on the way back, the stadium was half full. All the supporters were moaning, saying, we don't like the coach. We've got to improve a lot, even just to survive in the first division. And here we are, just a few months later, that same team, that same lineup are runaway leaders of the Brazilian Championship. So this is a point, I think. It's right where the wonderful, unpredictable nature of football reasserts itself despite everything.
Okay, and that is where we have to leave it. Thank you to all of you for being with us. And that is it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C.